All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm Kevin DeAnna. You know, one of the biggest lies they tell you, and this is really fundamental to the whole left-wing model, is the idea that the capitalists are on the side of the nationalists. In fact, that capitalism created nationalism. They created fascism. They created the far right. They're the ones backing them. And you can understand why they say that. In some sense, the left has never quite recovered from the workers supporting their nations at the beginning of World War I. It supported their entire theory went right out the window. Everything that's happened since has been them trying to explain why. They blame the culture, they blame Christianity, they blame patriarchy. This is where everything comes from, right? What we call cultural Marxism, which is all leftism is at this point. It all comes from this kind of focus, this desperate need to explain. And this is fundamental to the racial issue too. Race is not a biological reality. Of course not. It's a trick. It was made up by the capitalists to allow for exploitation. This is what you're going to get told in every single university course. Capitalism is racism. Racism is whiteness. The white race is a social construct. It was created to allow for exploitation. Definitely this is a bigger discussion, but let's take just one citation, this from a South African publication called Class and Race, Marxism, Racism, and the Class Struggle. It's a fringe group, but this is the conventional wisdom. This is pretty typical of what you're going to get. Quote, racism was created by the social conditions in Europe as capitalism began its long development. From the 15th century, the development of the Atlantic slave trade began a long process that would crystallize racist prejudices. Over the next 2 centuries, over 12 million black people were enslaved and sent to the Americas. They came to constitute a vast slave population. Their status as slaves, the bottom rung of the social ladder, became inseparable from their skin color. It was this that created the social conditions for anti-black racism. As Marxist historian Eric Williams described it in his book, British Capitalism and British Slavery, the features of the man, his hair, color, and dentifrice, his subhuman characteristics so widely pleaded, were only the later rationalizations to justify a simple economic fact that the colonies needed labor and resorted to Negro labor because it was cheapest and best. Anti-black racism has been called into existence and would not now disappear. It existed in the colonies and in the metropoles that benefited from its existence. When slavery was ended throughout the 19th century, Williams noted that this did not eradicate the racist prejudices it had created. He said, the ideas, racism, built on these interests, slavery, continue long after the interests have been destroyed and work their old mischief, which is all the more mischievous because the interests to which they corresponded no longer exist. But this was not just historical inertia. Despite the ending of the Atlantic slave trade, capitalism would require racism to justify new economic interests, unquote. Why go through this? Because this is what you're going to be told about everything. This is the standard thing. This is the baseline. Everything from any corporate DEI thing to anything you're going to get in a university to anything you get from a politician's speech ultimately is downstream of this kind of argument. Why is there racism? They needed cheap black labor. The capitalists just kind of came up with this to justify it. And you can trace whatever other forms of racism to certain economic conditions. This is what it's all about. And there's this whole school of scholarship developing about what they call racial capitalism. Capitalism depended on the slave trade, no capitalism. Therefore, what wealth was created by capitalism was actually built by slavery. Now you see the relevance. Whenever you hear the arguments like, oh, blacks built America, slavery built America, everything is made out of cotton, whites didn't build anything, they just stole the wealth. This is all downstream from this kind of academic argument. This is fundamentally where it comes from. Walter Johnson wrote in the Boston Review in 2017, again, not that this is so special or he's so important or anything else, but this is just so typical. Quote, indeed, the history of capitalism makes no sense separate from the history of the slave trade and its aftermath. There was no such thing as capitalism without slavery. The history of Manchester never happened without the history of Mississippi. And no Mississippi, no Manchester is something of a slogan now in certain circles. So why do I care? Why should you care? Well, if racial capitalism is a thing, racial communism certainly is. And that is the ideology that is motivating the rising power of the Democratic Socialists of America and other groups. And there is a theory behind it. Because yes, we can say, and we say on X, look, they're just anti-white. They just hate white people. Okay, yeah, they do. But there is a theory behind it. They justify it by saying, no, actually, this is about economic interests. We're not just anti-white. And it's really important you understand where this is coming from if you want to defeat it. And none of this is really new. Like when it comes to race, especially in this country, none of the arguments are new. People were saying this in the 1960s. We've been dealing with the same questions for decades before you were born. When these people come out and say, oh, I have some bold new theory to explain racism, you can find somebody saying it a century ago. Even Martin Luther King, contrary to what the boomer conservatives would tell you, would make these explicit kind of arguments. He was, after all, a socialist. On March 25th, 1965, Martin Luther King said, quote, racial segregation as a way of life did not come about as a natural result of hatred between the races immediately after the Civil War. There were no laws segregating the races then, and as the noted historian C. Van Woodward in his book, The Strange Career of Jim Crow, which you probably had to read in school, clearly points out, the segregation of the races was really a political stratagem employed by the emerging bourbon interests in the South to keep the Southern masses divided and Southern labor the cheapest in the land, unquote. This is what they always tell you. Racism is to keep the working class divided, to keep wages low. That's why they come up with it. Well, how did they do this? And he said, well, if the poor white plantation or mill worker became dissatisfied with low wages, the plantation or mill owner would merely threaten to fire him and hire former Negro slaves and pay him even less. This is what King said. And he said, thus, the Southern wage level was kept almost unbearably low. But here's the problem. Well, if the blacks are being used to take jobs that used to belong to white men and keep wages low, how does that fit with the idea of keeping the races separate and not wanting blacks in your society? And incidentally, how exactly did these capitalists trick the poor whites into going along with segregation if it harmed their interests? Well, King explains this. Get ready. Through their control of mass media, they revised the doctrine of white supremacy. Yeah, the damn white supremacist media barons, they're the ones causing all our problems. Okay, here's the problem. If all of this is true, why did you even have the war on slavery? When the industrial North conquered the South at a ruinous cost, basically annihilated whatever wealth had been accumulated by slavery, reduced an entire area of the country to ashes, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Why did the federal government and the press and the business community champion desegregation in the 1960s? Move it forward. Look at the world we live in now. Like, take a good look at it. Why does big business align itself with multiculturalism, with diversity, with support for mass immigration, with support for social liberalism? If capitalism supports racism and reactionary social beliefs, where are these capitalists doing this? Where are the capitalists backing nationalism? I mean, even Elon Musk, oh, he backed Trump. Okay. Elon Musk said he would go to war to support more H-1B visas, i.e. immigration, i.e. more Indians. This is who they are. None of these people back right-wing interests on culture, and this is not surprising. Why would they? Think of the logic of it. If you're an economic man, what do you want? You want everyone to be reduced to atomized, deracinated consumer units. You want everybody interchangeable in a culture that is defined by products. You don't want strong families. Strong families get in the way. You want women in the workforce, and also that lets you reduce wages. Segregation gets in the way. You don't want like functional public spaces. You don't want pools that people can go to. You don't want parks that ordinary people can enjoy. You want to make it so if people want good things, they have to pay for them. You don't want faith. You don't want religion. You don't want traditional social values. You don't want restraint. You want people completely driven by their desires, their basest desires, spending everything they have. I mean, people take out a loan now to order a pizza. They call it limbic capitalism. You deliberately want to provoke addictive consumption, and then you make money off it. In contrast, what is nationalism? Sacrifice, solidarity, authority, unity, militarism, strength. There's no money to be made here. I mean, he's not nearly as prominent as he used to be because of his ties with, well, you know, Jeffrey Epstein. But Noam Chomsky was right fundamentally when he said, see, capitalism is not fundamentally racist. It can exploit racism for its purposes, but racism isn't built into it. Capitalism basically wants people to be interchangeable cogs, and differences among them, such as on the basis of race, usually are not functional. I mean, they may be functional for a period, like if you want a super exploited workforce or something, but those situations are kind of anomalous. Over the long term, you can expect capitalism to be anti-racist just because it's anti-human. And race is, in fact, a human characteristic. There's no reason why it should be a negative characteristic, but it is a human characteristic. So therefore, identifications based on race interfere with the basic ideal that people should be available just as consumers and producers, interchangeable cogs who will purchase all of the junk that's produced. That's their ultimate function, and any other properties they might have are kind of irrelevant and usually a nuisance. That's Noam Chomsky from Understanding Power. And here's the thing. Yeah, he's a leftist and whatever else. But that's not very different from what Sam Francis said in Leviathan. That's not very different from what a reactionary, a Southern agrarian, or somebody like that would say 100 years ago. Skip all that. That's not very different from what a fascist would say, or a National Socialist, or whatever flavor of the third position you want to call yourself. And that's before we even get into the idea that race is a biological reality, that people are different. They will behave differently. This has consequences. But that's the thing you really can't admit if you're on the left. That's the contradiction that blows up their whole model. Not just that we are biological creatures and we're not just shaped by social conditions, and that biology and therefore race drives us at the most primal level, not economic circumstances, but that the inner logic of capitalism does not lead to right-wing goals in terms of culture. It doesn't lead to nationalism, certainly not to fascism. It doesn't lead to traditional morality. It doesn't lead to strong families. It doesn't lead to the higher development of human types. What does it lead to? Drive around this country and you'll see. It leads to kratom shops and skill games at the convenience stores with the Indian owners and OnlyFans and sports gambling and open borders. That's where it leads. And that's where it has to go. That's the logic of the system, obviously. But if you're a progressive, you can't admit that. So what do you have to do? You have to come up with this stupid theory. And fundamentally, Marxists never predicted the idea of a reaction against them that wasn't based on just money. So when you see something like the far right, you have to say, well, fascism, nationalism, they're just bribed. They're just the thugs of the elite. They're defending late-stage capitalism. And apparently we've been in late-stage capitalism for like a century now. This from the show The Son of the Century, depicting the once socialist leader Mussolini being bribed by the evil capitalists.
Vogliono il nostro aiuto.
Esatto.
Quei parassiti.
Esatto.
E andare contro i braccianti che fanno la fame e lottano come possono per migliorare uno stato di vita infame, mentre i proprietari terrieri si ingrassano senza ritegno.
Sì.
Contro gli operai che lavorano 14 ore al giorno per il profitto di industriali che non si degnano neanche di andarli a trovare nelle fabbriche.
Sì, sì.
Contro tutti, contro i deboli, gli oppressi, gli sfruttati, contro tutto quello per cui abbiamo consacrato la nostra vita, la nostra lotta, Cesarino.
Infatti...
Spudorati, cazzo. Perché mai dovremmo metterci dalla parte dei vampiri?
Now, look, I'm not going to torment you guys by getting into a giant discussion of economics here, right? The dismal science. But suffice to say, central planning has its shortcomings. The price system really does tend to be the best way to allocate scarce resources. That's why we live in the system. But here's the problem. There is nothing in this system, in the capitalist system, that allows decision makers to make the best long-term choices. It can't be done. The temptation is always to maximize profits in the next quarter and then get out. You don't actually have a stake in the success of all of these institutions, certainly not in society. This is the critical problem. And one insight from Marxism I actually 100% agree with is that it's in capitalism's nature to create its own destroyer, but it's not the industrial proletariat. That whole theory is just wrong. I mean, wages went up, living standards went up with time. Marx didn't know what he was talking about. But it does create its destroyer in the sense that they will import a non-white population that will ultimately destroy the ability to create and sustain wealth. And of course, along with that, any chance at a functional nation or a high-trust society. This is where we're at. This is what's happening. Well, that seems like they don't believe that. You're just exaggerating. You're just obsessed with race. Okay. Look, don't listen to me. Ignore every word I have to say. I don't care. Listen to them. So this is Milat Kiros, who's from Dantooine. I don't know. She's from Ethiopia or something. And for some reason, we had to bring her here. I don't know. And this is a nominee for Congress in Colorado. I think it's the 1st congressional district in Colorado. This is the Democratic nominee, so she'll probably win. And she'll be in Congress. And what does she have to say about immigration? She says it's a way of getting revenge on America. Don't believe me. Listen for yourself.
I think it's particularly important, not just for our community in Tigray, but communities of the global South, period, right? There's a certain reckoning that we are going to have with the global world order as it exists today. and the way that it fundamentally will have to shift going forward, right? The responsibility that we have as Americans, the recognition that is going to be required of us, of the exploitative and extractive nature that we play on the global scale and the global stage, is only going to be challenged if we are getting represented by people who understand that on a fundamental level, right? And that means getting more immigrants into office. That means getting more people who have heritage in the global South into office, because that's where those decisions are made specifically.
This is an iron law of history. Cheap labor destroys nations, and capitalists cannot help themselves. They can't restrain themselves from making a disastrous choice that will doom even them in the long run. They can't look to the long-term perspective. Whatever books or religion or philosophies they follow, if any, it doesn't matter. The nature of the system will lead them into importing foreigners who will work for nothing, and they will dump the costs and the externalities on the taxpayers, which is why it's not even a free market, and then they will turn right around and privatize the profits, and they will pretend that this can just go on forever. And if you're an American worker, you are trapped in this pincer movement between the communists who just openly hate you and build this system of patronage for non-whites that you will not get anything out of, and then these businessmen who don't even care enough about you to hate you. Like, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. They don't even think you're worthy of consideration. They're just going to import the infinite masses of the third world to take your job, a job that those people can do for less because you are subsidizing them with taxpayer-funded welfare and all these programs. And here's the worst part. Both sides are going to sell this to you in the name of empathy and equality and God and compassion. In reality, both materially gain from your destruction. In reality, both capitalism and communism are two sides of the same materialist coin, and they both lead to the exact same place. Now, what prompts me to say this today specifically? Well, the Republicans, at least a lot of them, once again, are pushing for an amnesty bill. This from The Federalist. Headline: 47 Republicans are pushing amnesty for illegal alien agricultural workers. Quote: dozens of House Republicans are pushing a mass amnesty bill that would expand a visa program for illegal alien agricultural workers and give many of them legal status. 47 Republicans, it's actually 48 now, have signed on to a bipartisan bill in the House that would allow illegal aliens who work in agriculture as of May 31st, 2026, to obtain H-2A farm worker visas, giving them legal status and waiving some immigration violations like illegally obtaining an agriculture job in order to allow that to happen. It likewise allows employers that hired these illegal workers to bypass accountability. With the border now secure, it is time to address these shortcomings and provide fair and legal pathways for all of agriculture to obtain workers when they are unable to find U.S. citizens willing to perform these noble but arduous tasks, states a Dear Colleague letter from bill author Representative Glenn Thompson, Republican of Pennsylvania, chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, according to Politico, unquote. Did you catch that little trick there? Okay, you peasants, we secured the border. We did what you wanted. But now that it's secure, now we can do amnesty. Now it's time for common sense. Notice how the argument changes. For decades before Trump, it was, you can't possibly secure the border until you do amnesty. Of course we want to secure the border. Of course nobody supports open borders. But to secure the border, you got to give them something. Let's be reasonable. You have to do amnesty to secure the border. And then, of course, Trump gets in and the border's secure in like a week. Well, now we have to, okay, we were wrong about that. But really, now is the better time to pass amnesty because the border is secure. The argument just changes. But they always want what they want. They always want the cheap labor. And what is this premised upon? There are just no Americans to do these jobs? Nope, just don't exist. Well, could we pay higher wages? Could we use automation? Could we use any of these countless machines that are being rolled out all the time so we don't have to import this slave class of hostile foreigners who hate our guts to pick our food? Absolutely not. Unthinkable. The way the free market works is businesses don't have to invest in themselves. The government has to make sure they don't lose any money. And the costs get dumped on the American people. That's what freedom is all about. You're not a socialist, are you? Now, of course, not that the left doesn't back this. They do. They don't care about cheap labor. Remember, AOC just a few days ago said the problem with the immigration crackdown is it's increasing labor costs. These are our socialists, right? These are our friends of the workers. But they know that these people are guaranteed votes and reinforcements in the racial war against the American people. So, of course, they want to import them. But let's focus on the Republicans for now. Here's Glenn Thompson, by the way. You can't make up this appearance. You'll see it in a second. Won re-election last time by more than 40 points. 40 points. Like, he's not doing this because he's politically under threat, because he has to show he's a moderate. If it was like a swing district, he'd be like, oh, okay, I understand why he has to do this. No, he doesn't have to do any of this. It's just contempt for his voters. I mean, look at this guy. This is the phenotype of the people who gave your country away. Because, yeah, we're all adults here. Like, oh, the Frankfurt School and the Kalergi Plan. And have you ever seen The Greatest Story Never Told? Yeah, I know. Like, I've seen the same stuff you have. I've read the same books you did. But what's really going on here when you have a Protestant who's from a district, I think Pennsylvania's 15th congressional district, it's over 90% white. Do you know how hard that is to find in this country now? 90% white, politically unassailable. That district voted for Donald Trump 69% to 31% in an election where they're holding signs at the Republican National Convention calling for mass deportations now. You have all of that. And the guy who represents them, the first thing he can think of to do, we need to pass amnesty. We absolutely have to have more non-whites in the country doing cheap labor. This is after the Supreme Court says birthright citizenship is in the Constitution because of Amy Coney Barrett's feelings and John Roberts not wanting to get in trouble. This is after states like California went from the absolute bedrock of the conservative movement and a middle-class paradise into a third-world state with extreme wealth inequality, utterly corrupt and unaccountable one-party rule, and a dwindling white minority. This is after you see the rise of outright socialism in the Democratic Party, them winning offices, having a caucus within Congress itself, the Democratic establishment bending the knee, Gen Z, heavily non-white, by the way, completely supporting it. This is after seeing all of this and more. There is no mystery about how all this is going to end. So if it's just naivete, if it's just like, well, we didn't know what's happening, this is just criminal stupidity. And yet here we are. And I know it's so insane that you say, well, it can't just be that, right? It can't just be stupidity. There's got to be something else going on here. There's got to be something more nefarious. Well, look, speaking from the conservative movement perspective, you don't know how stupid a lot of these people really are. And look, I understand where you're coming from, because what you would say, and I would say it too, is like, look, you're letting the real power off the hook, right? There comes a point, though, where they don't actually have anything on these sorts of people. Like, it's not Jeffrey Epstein's blackmail ring. It's not some Kabbalistic international clique or whatever else. It's just this bovine animal stupidity, this short-sightedness where they're just complete whores for cheap labor, and they just don't think any farther than that. And there's a whole lobby of these people. And yeah, it's not just that, right? Like Ricardo Duchesne, who we had on the show, has this whole book where he says, like, no, it's not the Jews. It's not this group. It's not like some active plot. It's not a conspiracy. It's just the logic of the system that's driving the replacement. The late Guillaume Fay, there's a book out of Arctos called The Ethnocide System. I just read it. It's the same sort of thing. It's like, yeah, it's the system. It's not a deliberate thing. Fine, I get it. But come on, right? Power exists. Agency exists. People can do things. There is a power in the world, as someone once said at an American Renaissance conference, and that power is pushing these policies on purpose, and it uses legal repression and censorship and media brainwashing and terror to deliberately force us into being a minority out of spite and hatred. Yes, we shouldn't be confused about that. But why isn't it stopped? Why isn't it stopped when we have the numbers in our country still? Because when you have people who just can't see past their own greed, and it's not even the kind of greed you can sort of respect, it's just for nothing. They just give themselves away for peanuts. They just give it away. Like, these are your leaders. So what do you expect? And we know it's going to end in the same place. Like, we all know 100% that this ends with their little pet nons voting to confiscate everybody's property. It's just this kind of boomer brained, well, I'll be dead by then, so it doesn't matter. Just absolute pigs wallowing in their own filth. Like, are they even conscious? And speaking of pigs, Representative Don Bacon, easily one of the worst Republicans of Congress, comes out in support of this thing. And he posts the following: "This is what most of our farmers are requesting. Perhaps you're on the wrong side of this issue or with the Democrats. Support our farmers," unquote. This is the trick, right? Okay, the left hates us. Yeah, they do. Well, are you with us or with them? No, we can't fall for this again. You have to reverse that equation. In any meaningful sense, it's the left and then the guys like Don Bacon who are on the same side. The left wouldn't matter if guys like this didn't exist. They're creating it. They're enabling it. And incidentally, I'll just note in passing with this one retweet that Bacon is one of these guys opposed to J.D. Vance being a future nominee because he thinks J.D. Vance isn't pro-Israel enough. Take a look at that one there. But let's get back to the immigration thing. I'll get into what this bill does. This also from that Federalist article. Quote, a significant plurality of crop farm workers have no work authorization whatsoever. Good deal if you can get it. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which states in 2020 to 2022, 32% of crop farm workers were U.S. born, 7% were immigrants who had obtained U.S. citizenship, 19% were other authorized immigrants, primarily permanent residents or green card holders, and the remaining 42%, so plurality, had no work authorization. That number also appears to leave out account for livestock and dairy. Politico reported that the bill is a reflection of the goals of some agricultural industry lobbies. The American Farm Bureau Federation came out in strong support of the bill, noting that it declares H-2A workers to be essential. That means the bill shields such workers from adverse effects of a government shutdown. For example, in the case of a lapse of government appropriations, all functions necessary for the processing, certification, and admission of H-2A workers shall be deemed essential to the protection of life and property, and such functions shall continue uninterrupted for the duration of such lapse, it states. While current H-2A regulations require that labor certifications cannot last longer than a year, the new bill would allow such visas to last for 3 years, meaning that the annual requirement for an employer to assess whether it can hire a native-born worker first before looking internationally is likewise extended, unquote. So now they don't have to look for Americans anymore. And even better, they get a special carve-out. So if there's a government shutdown, which of course we always get because Congress isn't capable of doing its job, your services might get delayed. You may have to deal with delays at the airport. You may not get whatever aid you need. You may not be able to go to a government office. You may not be able to go to a park or whatever you want to do, but you're just a citizen. You're a slave. We hate your guts. We want you to know it, but they're special. They're essential. They matter. They're exempted. You're not. Just whores for cheap labor. Play a quick segment. This is from Steve Bannon's show featuring Rosemary Jenks. Now, if you're familiar with immigration policy, Rosemary Jenks is a very credible source. She was director of government relations for Numbers USA. She was a former staffer at the Center for Immigration Studies. Now she's policy director at the Immigration Accountability Project. This is not someone on the Rumble podcast circuit selling you bullshit or making sensational claims about whatever. Like they're passing amnesty because they're possessed by demons. No, this is someone who's a credible source going back decades on this issue. This is not the globalists are making their move and I'm trying to titillate like retards. No, this is the reality of policy. This is how bad it is. This is how the sausage is made. This is how utterly irrelevant America and its interests and its people are to the people who represent you. So, Rosemary Jenks.
Viral right now about this issue of a farm bill that's coming up that argues for or grants amnesty for farm workers. Can we get the tweet up on this? What is going on here, ma'am?
Yeah, so it's not actually what we call the farm bill. It's not the, agricultural policy bill. This is a separate piece of legislation that was introduced by Glenn Thompson, Congressman Glenn Thompson from Pennsylvania, who is the chairman of the Agriculture Committee. And it is straight up an amnesty bill. It gives amnesty H-2A visas to basically any illegal alien who can claim to have worked in agriculture for, at least 6 months of the last 2 years. And we've already done this, Steve. We did this in 1986, specifically with agricultural amnesty. And the degree of fraud in that program exceeds anything we've ever seen in any government program. So, why you would expect a different result with this is it's ludicrous. The fraud would be massive. And in fact, in 1986, when we did this, we actually gave amnesty to a terrorist, one of the terrorists who bombed the World Trade Center. This is absurd. This is a group of, it's actually 48 Republican co-sponsors plus 4 Democrats now. These Republicans have been bought and sold by their big ag donors. That's the bottom line. This is about big corporate agriculture getting the cheapest labor they possibly can.
And what is the excuse they always give us, right? Oh, we have a labor shortage. Do we really have a labor shortage? According to the headlines you may have seen everywhere, those not in the labor force, NILFs as they are called, make your own joke, now up to 105.8 million people. People just not in the labor force. And how many people out there do you know? Maybe you're one of them. You just can't get a job. You can't get a call back, no matter how many applications you submit, any kind of job. And what's going to happen as AI continues to develop and many white-collar jobs just become a thing of the past? What about all those skilled jobs that Americans are essentially banned from because of H-1B visas? But what does CBS tell us? Headline, the U.S. labor market may soon face a new crisis. Too few workers. Quote, even as many workers are fearful that artificial intelligence could endanger their jobs, there's a potentially bigger employment crisis on the horizon, I'm sure. A severe labor shortage that is set to emerge over the next 10 to 15 years, according to a leading demographer. Demand for young workers is going to explode during that period, leaving employers with a shortage of qualified workers, isn't there always? But those dynamics could boost workers' prospects, helping them secure better wage growth and labor conditions, he said. The less competition workers have, the better their earning prospects are, expert Stephen Ruggles explained. This is likely to lead to rising wages for young people, stronger unions, and lower inequality, he said. For the few people entering the labor force, there is going to be an outstanding economic opportunity. They are going to do very well, unquote. Now, here's the thing. Isn't that a strange thing to say and couple with the language of crisis? And isn't it interesting how supply and demand now suddenly applies to labor too? I mean, how many times have you said obviously if we restrict immigration, wages will go up? And people are like, no, that's not true. Well, yes, obviously it's true. The key here is that many Republicans seem to see the idea of Americans getting paid higher wages, especially young people, as a kind of disaster, as something we need to avoid at all costs. Like we don't want rising wages. Because when they say labor shortage, what they mean is just rising wages. And a lot of Democrats agree with them. Why? Because if you have high wages, if you have happy workers, you don't have a mass of pissed off dependents that you can tap to destroy civilization. And because they just want to import as many non-white immigrants as possible. Now, the question is this. Is the Trump administration going to stand up to it? There are some worrying signs. So this from the Washington Post. Headline, Trump immigration officials seek to mend frayed ties with business as arrests spike. Quote, the Department of Homeland Security under Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen is cultivating a relationship with business groups whose concerns about losing workers to aggressive immigration enforcement have been rebuffed by former Secretary Kristi Noem. Earlier this month, DHS officials met at the agency's Washington headquarters with the Essential Worker Immigration Coalition, which represents the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and major trade associations that depend on immigrant labor, according to several people with knowledge of the meeting, which has not been previously reported. It was the first such meeting to be reported since President Donald Trump re-entered the White House. Business groups say they've been trying to gain a foothold at the agency ever since Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, arrests began to spike last year. Immigration arrests have more than quadrupled since Trump took office, driven by a dramatic increase in traffic and neighborhood stops, workplace sweeps, and other public arrests, according to the Deportation Data Project. As a result, industries including agriculture, manufacturing, construction, healthcare, and elder care say they are reeling from shortages in jobs critical to the economy. Noem was dismissive of those concerns while overseeing chaotic enforcement operations that drew bipartisan outrage, especially after agents shot and killed 2 U.S. citizens in Minnesota in January. Trump fired her in March and turned to Mullen, a U.S. senator from Oklahoma and former plumbing company owner, unquote. Now notice the framing here. Notice how the progressive press operates. Notice the move. It was chaos when they were deporting these people. Like, we hate the capitalist pig dogs too. We hate their greed and everything else. We're journalists. We hold them accountable. But here, you need to give them what they want. Americans can't do jobs. We can't give them wages. Manufacturing, healthcare, i.e. Medicare fraud, construction. Americans can't do any of those things. People are leaving the workforce in record numbers. Well, that's just another reason to bring in more foreigners. What do you mean? Like, what could this lead to in the long run? Why do you care? Why are you even thinking about that? What are you, a racist? We have to serve the economy. This is what it's all about. I'm a good progressive. Like, this is how they frame it. According to the new data that was just released, in fiscal year 2026, ICE carried out about 356,389 deportations. That's about 1,260 per day. There are almost 66,000 people in ICE detention right now. So the border czar, Tom Homan, he's out there bragging they've been doing a record number of immigration arrests. This is true. This is not propaganda. They're not like doing nothing. No, they are doing record levels of activity. This is quite literally more than anything we have ever seen before when it comes to immigration enforcement. This is true. But at this pace, will this be enough to undo what Biden alone did? No, not even close. And it's not like the pressure on ICE is going to decline anytime soon. Just yesterday, a man was arrested after setting a fire at the entrance of an ICE headquarters. This from the outlet The Center Square. Headline, FBI, suspect in federal building attack was anti-ICE extremist. Quote, James Barnacle, the assistant director in charge of the FBI's New York field office, said the suspect had a cache of weapons, including axes, a hammer, a machete, knives, and other incendiary devices in a wheeled beach cart with an ICE off our street sign attached. Barnacle said he told authorities that he was targeting the building and he was okay if he hurt or killed people going in and out of the building, whether they were federal employees or civilians. He made several anti-government and anti-ICE statements during the incident, Barnacle told reporters at a Monday afternoon briefing. While further details cannot be shared at this time, investigators have found no indication of an ongoing threat to the public, unquote. Now, how would this play out? I mean, how is this playing out right now? If you're a moderate conservative, if you want your cheap labor, what you're going to do is you're going to say, well, I don't condone such attacks, of course, but you can see how ICE is creating tension in our communities. We need a common sense solution to make sure willing workers are matched up with jobs that Americans just won't do, and then we won't have this kind of unpleasantness. This is how the radical left serves as handmaiden to the corporate right. And it won't end well for the latter, but they never learn. They never learn. It is always worth quoting Saul Alinsky. They will sell you the rope on Friday, they will have the revolution on Saturday, and then you can hang the capitalists on a Sunday. They will be led to the guillotine. They still won't recognize what's going on. But that raises a question for us. Is it our purpose in life to save these idiots from themselves? Because that's pretty uninspiring if that's our job. If we accept that both capitalism and communism are flawed because they see politics as fundamentally about economic relationships and social constructs and economic analysis, what is the alternative? I mean, this is where we talk about the third position, but the problem is there are basically just two sides in politics. I mean, people have tried to do a third party or a third force. I think there was literally a party called American Third Position. It never gets anywhere. So really what you have to do is you have to conquer the right. You have to redefine the right. So it's not just the business lobby. It's not just the cheap labor lobby. It's not just the enabler of the left. It's not just the faction of those who want to cash out and flee. I mean, it's a fundamental reconstruction here. Nayib Bukele in El Salvador is a quote I posted on X a couple years back, and I thought it was brilliant. He said, power is vested in kings, or it inevitably ends up with the merchants. What we're really talking about is the need for the political to have dominance over the economic. And maybe this is foreign to a lot of Americans because as Anglo-conservatives, we have been systematically taught that the purpose of government is to facilitate trade and fulfill contracts and protect property, and that's all government is. But that's not government. That's not even politics. And what's more, in the long run, that kind of mindset can't even fulfill its stated purpose. Why? Because the rule of merchants creates its own nemesis. Economic man's view of humanity is wrong. We are not the same. We are not just economic inputs. Capitalism is not capable of self-regulating and protecting against the self-destructive tendencies that it itself introduces in the long run. Because the temptation is always to have cheap labor, dump the costs on the taxpayer, privatize the profits, and that path always leads to doom. So what are we trying to do? In this fight to build a different kind of right, a real right, we are breaking the rule of the merchants. Nationalists must run the state, not the capitalists, and the capitalists will do what they are told. They have proven they cannot stop themselves. They will not learn. They will not learn even when the enemy that they created is coming for their throats and telling them their intentions. They cannot rule. They're too cowardly to fight. They will never support us, and therefore they must be made to submit and do what we tell them. And capital is a coward. They will go along with it. Yes, the left is an enemy. It is the enemy, but it's an enemy that we will deal with in time. Right now, the force we have to overcome is the cheap labor lobby. Right now, we have to take over the right. And I wish I could tell you the cheap labor lobby is animated by conspiracy or bribery, but a lot of it's just stupidity and greed and pig-headed ignorance. We have to break them. We take over the right, we rule as nationalists, not as the servants of merchants. That is the program. Because make no mistake, if we do not do that, we are not going to get free markets or limited government or the Constitution. We're going to get what we already see happening, the third worldization of this country, because the capitalists, the cheap labor lobby, the rope sellers cannot help but import those who will destroy both us and them. The nation must rule, not the economy, not because I don't care about the economy, but because economic man can't help but destroy the very things that create wealth, prosperity, and a good society. We need patriots, not merchants. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. Well, the war in Iran has started up again with more American casualties and seemingly no way out for the administration. My guest today is a geopolitical expert who's had the right view on this since the beginning. Firas Modad is a presenter at Locust Eaters and the founder of Modad Geopolitics. He joins us now. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I mean, obviously, there's so much going on. I've been following your commentary for a really long time, and I just want to jump right back into it. It's something you said. I guess this war is just never going to end now, right? I mean, given what Iran has just done, they're stuck in this forever. There's really no way out.
I mean, look, neither side is in a good position right now. The Iranians are not in a good situation. They're taking a lot of punishment. They're being hit repeatedly. You indefinitely taking punishment to some of your more important assets isn't a strategy. At the same time, the Americans are also in a pretty bad position. The bases that they have around the region are slowly being smashed. Their credibility as a security guarantor is falling apart. They're being forced to concentrate their forces in the west of Saudi Arabia and in Israel and in Jordan. And that makes them more vulnerable, and it limits their ability to generate sorties and conduct strikes against the Iranians. And the world economy can't take this war continuing indefinitely. If there is a global debt crisis, the Iranians don't care because they don't have any foreign debt.
Right.
So the US is also not in a good position here. As to how do they get out of it, how do the Americans get out of it, the Americans can't accept Iran as the regional hegemon in the Middle East, which is the implication of Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran runs Hormuz, then they're taxing the Gulf states to export oil and to import goods. That means that the Gulf states would be paying tribute, essentially, to the Iranians. There is no reason to pay tribute to two empires. And that means that the Iranians are in control of 20% of global oil exports, which makes them into a global powerhouse by definition, even if not all of the money of that 20% is going to them. It also means that if they and the Russians want to set a different price for oil, they get to do that jointly. So it would be a major defeat for the United States to allow this. Then there's the nuclear issue.
Right.
Now we're hearing that the Iranians have enrichment facilities under this Pickaxe Mountain, which is an attachment to the Natanz facility, but very deep underground. That means, well, with the war having started and restarted, the logical thing for the Iranians to do to guarantee the survival of the regime is to build a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Because the United States cannot stick to an agreement. And this isn't an Iranian conclusion. The Russians have reached the conclusion that the Americans aren't deal capable. The Chinese have reached the conclusion that the Americans aren't deal capable. And the Iranians have had it proven to them because they signed an agreement with Obama. Congress intervened to make sure that the agreement was unimplementable. Then Trump ripped it apart. And even before he had done that, the Europeans couldn't implement their side of the deal because the Americans were still saying, no, you can't.
Right.
So the West is in a position where it has all of these enemies, and these are important enemies because you're putting China, Iran, and Russia into one bloc that naturally dominates Eurasia, and you're saying, I'm going to fight all of Eurasia.
Yeah.
That's not strategy. The strategy would be remove sanctions on Russia. Who cares where the border of Ukraine is? Use Russia along with Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and Vietnam to contain China and India, and focus on the actual big threat, which is the Chinese, and deprive the Chinese of resource-rich allies that can supply them natural resources at discounted prices over land. That would be the strategy to contain China. But what's happening here is a strategy to instigate a global war. And in this war, it is the Europeans and the West in general who are going to be the losers.
Is it just a question of American foreign policy being held prisoner by Israel here? Because I've heard a lot of arguments about like, no, look, if you take a step back, this actually is in America's interest because what we're trying to do is create this whole new Middle East. Iran was the one thing that's in the way. We could control the oil supplies if we just take out this one thing. And at worst, what they basically did was they assumed that after the first wave of airstrikes, the Iranian government would either collapse or that they would be eager to cut a deal. And so it's not so much that, oh, we're being dominated by foreign interests, but there actually is an American interest in destroying Iran here.
Well, let's look at this in a couple of different ways, right? With the Russia-Ukraine war, the agitator behind the unrest that led to the 2014 overthrow of Yanukovych was trying to balance a relationship between the Russians and the NATO bloc. The instigator was Soros. Then we saw the Epstein network intervening in that and having high-level communications with Zelensky and working closely with Zelensky to make money with, what's his name, the former Harvard guy, the former Treasury Secretary under Clinton, Larry Summers.
Right? Larry Summers.
Larry Summers. Going in and out of Ukraine for meetings and telling Epstein all about that. Epstein saying to the Rothschilds that he's going to help them trade off the back of this war, all of that war profiteering. And then we see Kushner and Witkoff heading in, trying to basically hand the country over to Larry Fink.
Right.
Okay. There's no Israel connection there. Victoria Nuland, Kagan, all of these guys, no Israel connection. Okay, fine. You can believe that if you want. With Iran, it's even worse. Iran, because of its location, it's surrounded by Sunni powers. It's stuck in the middle of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. The three major Sunni powers that, especially in collaboration, are a genuine threat, not just to Iran, but also to the West. And Iran, from the days of the Safavid Empire, had been looking first to the Portuguese and then to the British and then to the Americans as allies so that it can basically police its neighborhood and continue to exist as the world's only Shia state. Right. Everybody loves to say the only Jewish state, where there's also only one Shia state, and that's Iran. The problem with them aligning with the West has always been Israel. Now, to be fair, the change from the Shah to the Islamic Revolution made Israel into a much bigger problem.
Right.
Because the Islamic Revolution and its ideology viewed the Israelis as an aggressor, and they have this whole narrative. So how do I explain it? The founding myth of Shia Islam isn't the conquests by Muhammad, as is the case of Sunni Islam. The foundational story of Shia Islam is the martyrdom of Hussein.
Ali, right.
No, Hussein.
No, not Ali. Yeah,
his son. And the idea there is that he died in combat as a victim of injustice. So it's different from Christian thinking, because Christ wasn't fighting. He was the perfect victim. He was the spotless victim, is the spotless victim. Whereas for the Shia, no, it's dying in combat. This meant that when this revolutionary fervor took over, they couldn't let go of the Israel issue. And they couldn't let go of the humiliation that the Muslim world was being put through at the hands of Israel by conquering this territory and kicking out its inhabitants and just constantly attacking everybody around them. So that has to be said. They started a problem with Israel, but that was in response to the popular will.
Right.
The general public at the time was in favor of this. And Khomeini's referendum for his revolution and for his for his revolutionary constitution received a huge amount of support. You could say that the same thing to do would be to restrain the Israelis, at least to stop them attacking the Shia of Lebanon, and to work with the Iranians. But it's impossible for the West to say to the Israelis, you need to restrain yourselves. This is said sometimes, but it's never actually followed through. And so, yeah, you have to see the Israel element in this.
Yeah. What is the relationship then between the Sunni states and Iran? Because in many ways, one of the quiet things that people don't really talk about, if you remember the Iraq War, people used to always talk about the Arab Street. And if we go into Iraq, the Arab Street's going to rise up and everything else. Well, the Arab Street doesn't particularly care about Iran too much. I mean, obviously, if you want to infuriate an Iranian, call him an Arab, and you'll get an earful very quickly. But the Sunni states seem to be working more in partnership with Israel. Now, this partnership is endangered partially by the outcome of this war, because suddenly these Sunni states are looking around and they're getting hit by all these missiles and they're thinking to themselves, well, we're not getting anything out of this anymore.
Yes.
But is it possible for the Sunni Arab states to do a rapprochement with Tehran, or are they more likely to join in this continuing war, especially if there's not going to be a settlement anytime soon?
Right. So what we're seeing now is the emergence of this new great power axis of the Sunni Muslim world. Egypt and Turkey had an atrocious relationship for many years. The October 7 Hamas attack on Israeli civilians and soldiers ended up triggering a Turkish-Egyptian, or cementing a Turkish-Egyptian rapprochement, and now they just had an exchange of visits by defense ministers and ministers of defense production, whereby they're working together on jointly developing weapons, which is very unusual because Turkey and Egypt are on opposite sides in the Libya conflict and in other conflicts. And so now they see that actually Israel and Iran are a bigger problem. After the Israeli strikes on Qatar, you saw the Saudis go to Pakistan and sign a defense treaty with Pakistan, basically placing themselves under the Pakistani nuclear umbrella, essentially. And already Pakistan and Turkey have a long-standing defense partnership. When the India-Pakistan brief 12-day conflict was going on, I think it was 12 days. No, I'm getting my numbers confused. Anyway, when the India-Pakistan thing was happening, you saw the Turks sending a ship to Pakistan to try to help them detect Indian submarines. Now all four of them are working more closely together. And this is a huge deal because the population numbers that are available to them, the industrial power of Turkey, and to a much lesser extent, Pakistan and Egypt, and the natural resources of Saudi Arabia make this kind of combination into a global power. And they're seeing that they have a massive problem with Iran, and they're seeing that they have a massive problem with Israel. And naturally, they hate the West. The dream of Islam has always been global conquest. This is baked into the DNA of that religion. It's an integral part of it. So the net result of this policy is that on the one hand, you're pushing together China, Russia, and Iran. On the other hand, you're pushing together Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. both of these combinations are existential threats to the West. And you're promoting them both at the same time. That's the net result of this policy. So if the policy was formulated by somebody who wanted to absolutely destroy the West, they couldn't do much better.
It seems like the Israelis are even trying to back away from this whole thing. I think I saw a statement coming out of Israel today where they said, oh, we don't want any intervention in this like American-Iranian war. That's like the word chutzpah comes to mind, which I remember from my North Jersey upbringing.
So you saw Bezalel Smotrich, the lunatic who leads the Israeli finance ministry, saying basically, we want to stay out of the American-Iranian war. Okay, thanks for that. And you saw Haaretz, which is on the left-wing side of things in Israel, and their defense editor, Amos Harel, who is actually well regarded in Israel, saying Israel is at risk of being dragged into the American-Iranian war. Excuse me? What? Am I dreaming? Did I fall into some alternate reality? What's happening here? But that's what they're saying.
Right.
But I mean, and in the Middle East, there's an enormous amount of criticism against Iran. Why aren't you hitting Israel? What they're doing is slowly smashing radars around the region and putting pressure on the Americans to basically, when they do decide to hit Israel, if they do decide to hit Israel, the detection capability of the Israelis of incoming missiles would have been reduced, and they would therefore be able to force the Israelis to spend interceptors at a faster rate, and that would make future attacks on Israel more effective. But it's also obvious that the Iranians are terrified of the Israelis, because the Israeli thinking is, we want to make Iran uninhabitable.
Right. They're willing to go a lot farther than America will.
Basically, they don't have, obviously, Aquinas' distinction between combatant and non-combatant. This has never been an issue for them. So in 1993 and 1996, in the wars that they had in Lebanon, the Israelis were very open. We are destroying civilian areas to put pressure on the Lebanese government to contain Hezbollah. Like that's the strategy. We're just going to wreck civilian areas. Mm-hmm. In 2006, they developed something called the Dahi Doctrine, which was basically, okay, we can't find the areas where Hezbollah is launching missiles from, or we can't find the missile launchers. So we're just going to blow up civilian areas indefinitely until we get the terms that we want.
Right.
That's the Israeli thinking. So if you're going to go against them, and you're Iran, you're better off going against them in a quick and sharp war that minimizes the opportunities they have to cause massive amounts of damage against civilian areas. The Israelis say that this is evidence of their effective deterrence. I have to partially agree, and I have to say that this is obviously deeply dishonorable. Soldiers fight soldiers.
What is this? I mean, the essential contradiction in American policy, as I see it, is because we're getting two arguments at once. I mean, one, they didn't even really bother trying to explain how this served American interests. You had Rubio get up there and basically be like, well, Israel was going to go in, so we had to go in too. And you're like, all right,
yeah.
Well.
Why?
Yeah. Here's the essential contradiction as I see it, as far as the American strategy goes. Obviously, President Trump wants a deal. He keeps saying there is a deal. And then something happens and he goes, no, they're desperate to make a deal. They're desperate to make a deal and everything else. But at the same time, we're also told these people are madmen. They won't sign any kind of a deal. They're completely irrational about this kind of thing. So which is it? Because you can't simultaneously have your whole strategy impinge on, we are doing these military strikes because we're putting pressure on them and we're hoping that they're rationally going to conclude they're better off by signing this thing. And then at the same time say they're completely insane. You can't talk to these people. And that's why we have to keep hitting them.
Well, the reason that you hear that this American perception that they're insane is because the Iranians are insisting essentially on the U.S. pulling away from their borders. And in that sense, it's exactly what the Russians want. the Russians and the Iranians have found that if the Americans do get too comfortable close to your borders, you end up in a massive war that is incredibly costly. And again, the Iranians are paying a heavy price, the Russians are paying a heavy price. Absolutely. For the Americans, telling the empire to pull back just a little bit and make some room for another ancient power that is always going to be there in one form or another sounds like insanity. Because it implies a rejection of the global American empire.
Right.
It implies a rejection of the liberal extremism that we see sort of being pumped out of every organ of every Western government. With the US, it's slowed down a little bit under Trump. But if you look a little bit deeper, you'll still find a lot of it going on, I'm sure. Whenever the Democrats take power again, it'll be more of the same, because Trump absolutely failed to actually generate transformative change.
We did not get a regime change of the sort that I think everybody admits that we need if we're actually serious about this.
If you actually want to change your foreign policy, you need wholesale regime change. Trump, maybe because of the assassination attempts, maybe because he was always like this, basically ended up deciding, I'm better off making my sons even more fabulously rich and doing the bidding of the establishment. This seems to have been the point that he reached.
Is the American hope then, because I think what they were going for was that they would knock off Iran, and then you would basically get the Abraham Accords settled throughout the entire Middle East, and that would be the great normalization, that Israel would sort of have its deal with the Sunni Arab states. Everybody would just kind of stop caring about Gaza, except maybe in the West. Iran would be neutralized, and then we could get down to business in the Middle East, and that would be the new Middle East.
The Israelis don't give a fig about the Abraham Accords. The Israelis don't actually care about the Abraham Accords. The Americans think it's important, but the Americans are wrong. Because when it comes to military cooperation between the states of the Gulf and Israel, this already happens under the table.
Right.
When there is trade to be had, trade was happening with the Arab states from the 1990s, and it's documented. And even then, it's documented in the 90s as having been happening in the 80s. So it's been going on for some time. Foreign partnerships, when they want to work together, they find cutout companies and they work together. There is no deep necessity for the Abraham Accords on either side. Even for the Israelis, I mean, it actually suits them better to say that their neighbors are their enemies and they face an existential threat.
Right.
If they get normalization, they have to start behaving normally. They're incapable of doing that, especially the Messianic strand that controls the settlement policy in Israel and that drives a lot of the external military adventurism. These guys are not capable of being normal. Their worldview is that we are now in the beginning of the Messianic age, and the ingathering of the Jewish exiles has begun. And as this ingathering continues, and it must continue, it will reach a point where the Messiah will come. Their Messiah, the Messiah that they believe in will come. And so when you have this kind of mindset, it's very similar to the mindset of the Iranian Ayatollahs, who famously Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, supposedly told European foreign ministers that chaos is good because it brings about the Mahdi. And it's very similar to the mindset of Islamic State, who believed that when the true Muslims were going to band together and start fighting, there would be a battle that heralds the beginning of end times. So it's the same exact mindset. This is why, and it's the same mindset for the Christian Zionists.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but you beat me to it. Yeah, a lot of people here in Lynchburg they would agree with all that too.
So this is why I say that it's only the Catholics who have a sane view of the end times The end times are always with us. You read the book of Revelations for all times, and you have no idea when the hour comes. You can't do anything about it. Just be ready for it to happen tomorrow. Be ready for it to happen in 200 years.
Right, thief in the night, as opposed to if we hit this like missile site, we can get this show on the road, which seems to be how everybody else is going.
Yeah, that is how they're thinking.
But that I mean, everybody seems to be in an escalation trap here because of, as you point out, one of the things people say is like, well, Iran is winning the war. And it's, as you pointed out at the beginning, it's like, well, not really. I mean, like their Navy is gone. You've got all these things happening. You've seen scattered attacks on security forces, whatever else. Who knows what's going on with the stability of the regime? I mean, one of the problems I think the Trump administration is dealing with is there even a faction in the Iranian government that is capable of cutting a deal that will be obeyed by everybody? Like, who actually is in charge? Well, I mean, this is sort of up in the air.
There's a couple of things. Firstly, on the whole Navy and Air Force thing, the Iranians never had a Navy in that sense. Mm-hmm. What they have is the Mosquito Fleet, which is a bunch of small boats that you can put one or two anti-ship missiles on them and send a dozen at one ship, and one of them will make it and hit. That's the thinking behind it. The Air Force, it doesn't exist in the conventional sense. They have a few jets back from the 70s. They weren't dependent on that to begin with. The problem for them is that their infrastructure is being hit. And that's a real issue. Because as a country that cannot borrow money from abroad, they can't finance that reconstruction easily. It's a problem, and it's a real issue. They are reliant on for some of the oil and gas infrastructure. It hasn't been upgraded since the days of the Shah. They were never able to produce as much oil as they did under the Shah. So they have a real issue with that infrastructure being hit. That's real. When it comes to who are the decision makers in Iran, there's a lot of misunderstanding there. From the days of the Safavids, you had the people of learning, the bookish types, and the military types. And the Shah would control both and use both for different situations. So the foreign minister of Iran, if you remember when Javad Zarif tried to resign, when did he try to resign? In 2016, I think. Khamenei, the father, sends him a letter explaining, you will continue to implement foreign policy, not formulate, implement. Because the decision-making happens by a vote at the Supreme National Security Council, where you've got the IRGC and the president and a bunch of politicians and a representative of the supreme leader, But that does mean that the IRGC is the dominating force in Iran. And with Mujtaba, because he's weak for 2 reasons or 3 reasons. One, he is hidden, although the Shia have a long tradition of hidden leaders, and that's but he is hidden. 2, he's not, in fact, a proper religious authority. He is not a ranking scholar in the way that is required to be a supreme leader of Iran. He's not a marja, basically. And 3, he inherited the position, which goes against the ideals of the revolution. So as a weak leader, he is stuck with the IRGC. And that means that the actual decision makers have always been the same people, the IRGC. Under Khamenei, the father, he strengthened the IRGC massively at the expense of all other institutions.
Right.
And now they're in charge. And if this second Iran war didn't happen, if the Americans had stopped after Midnight Hammer and left Iran for a few years, you would have had essentially a military takeover under a nominal supreme leader.
Do you think that was one of the underlying reasons why they didn't stop, is because they saw this military takeover happening, and then that's the thing that they're afraid of above all other things?
Well, a military takeover would be a very good thing. Because
they would have better restraint.
Because they would be more restrained, on the one hand. because they would be more nationalistic, on the other hand. And if they were to be more nationalistic, they would look around and see that they're surrounded by Sunnis, and they'd look to Israel as a potential ally, and they'd look to the United States as an ally.
So there's just no strategic thinking regarding Iran whatsoever. I mean, I'm trying to like piece my way toward what exactly is the viewpoint in the White House.
The best argument that I've heard is that basically the Iranians were in the process of transferring the missile production and the nuclear enrichment capabilities under mountains that would be immune to airstrikes. So it was either do it now or never do it.
Right.
That's the best argument. That's also a stupid argument, because now all of the remaining resources of the Iranian state are going to be dedicated to moving the enrichment facilities and the missile production facilities underground as quickly as possible to continue pursuing the war. And because now the Iranians know with certainty that the only way the regime survives is if they test a nuclear weapon and tell the Americans to back off.
Until the recent war, this was something taken utterly for granted in both political parties in the United States, that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon no matter what. We now may be reaching the point where it's not in our power to determine whether they have a nuclear weapon or not, which means that the thing that should probably start impacting American policymakers is it that big a deal if Iran has a nuclear weapon? After all, Israel has a nuclear weapon. I mean, that's the biggest. It's not even a secret anymore. They don't even pretend.
Israel has a nuclear weapon. Tucker says that the Saudis have a nuclear weapon, or Tucker was told that the Saudis have a nuclear weapon. Pakistan has a nuclear weapon.
Do you buy that? I'm not sure I buy that the Saudis have one.
Honestly, if the Saudis were allowed to have one, that would be a freaking disaster. That country is one assassination from turning jihadi.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And this is, I mean, the ideology of Wahhabism of Saudi Arabia, which has been suppressed significantly under MBS through enormous brutality and necessary brutality.
Yeah.
That ideology is way scarier than anything that the Iranians believe.
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%.
But Pakistan is the same.
Yeah.
Pakistan is exactly the same. The idea, I find India having nuclear weapons to be insanely dangerous, because that is a society that is amoral and full of pride, in the same way that Pakistan is amoral and full of pride. And I would say that Pakistan is maybe, as a monotheistic country, slightly less bad than the Indians.
But either way, it's nothing we can do about it. I mean, there's no serious proposal like disarm it. So are we at the point now where that's just kind of how it is with Iran too? I mean, maybe the whole idea of that we're not going to allow people to develop nuclear weapons is gone because we just don't have the power to do it. We can't enforce these kinds of things anymore.
Nobody can enforce this anymore. And if the Iranians get a nuclear weapon, you know that the Turks are going to try.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, what would even be the argument against them having it?
Exactly.
And they're an interesting thing because they're in NATO. I wanted to bring this up before when you were talking about their relationship with Egypt and everything else, that they're forming this kind of bloc. Well, it puts us in an awkward position because they are part of NATO. And they're sort of an ally, but not really. I mean, they've been running kind of their own foreign policy in the Middle East for a long time, and they've been running the table, frankly, in terms of spreading their influence and everything else. And yet we still kind of go through the motions of pretending that they're an ally when actually their interests are fundamentally different at this point.
It's not just that their interests are fundamentally different, which is absolutely correct, and I agree with you completely on that. It's that they are a civilizational enemy of the West.
Yeah, 100%.
They are the historic civilizational enemy of the West. And their ambitions haven't stopped. Ahmed Davutoglu, the former Turkish foreign minister and national security advisor, who was basically the architect of Erdogan's foreign policy, both in its interventionist phase and in its peaceful phase. He was of the view that basically Turkey should dominate everything, the entire Sahel region of Africa, all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, Europe, at least until Albania, the Caucasus, all the way to Grozny in Chechnya, and Central Asia, all the way to the Chinese border.
So we're bringing back the Ottomans on steroids is essentially what
the
we're
Ottomans
going
on
with here.
steroids. The Ottomans on steroids. Exactly. That was his view. And this guy became the foreign minister of Turkey.
Great.
And at some point, the prime minister of Turkey before his fall from grace. So Turkey is a civilizational enemy of the West. And you are supposed to pretend that it's an ally. And if you don't pretend that it's an ally, you are overturning the international rules-based order, whatever the hell that is.
Right. How's that working out for us? Yeah.
Whatever that is. Because apparently a few rules written after the shock of World War II sort of supersedes all of human history and all of human nature. That's what you're meant to believe.
Yeah.
That's what you're meant to believe. And you're meant to believe that ancient hatreds have all disappeared now, and we're all going to head towards the end of history.
The people in the West really seem to believe. I mean, one of the things that I'm always struck by, because every once in a while you kind of get into one of these rooms where the decisions are being made, so to speak. You talk to people who have some power or used to have some power, retired policymakers, that kind of a thing. And there's always this moment of terror where they start talking about the rules-based international order or the end of history or liberal democracy. And you get the horrifying realization, and maybe this is just me, and maybe I'm being naive,
Right.
but they really seem to believe what they're saying. Like they actually believe this crap, at least a lot of people in European capitals and in Washington, D.C. Like they really just think if we try a little bit more, if we move some people around and everything else, we're all just going to become part of the global economy and then everything will be fine.
One big, beautiful economic zone.
Yeah, basically. I mean, am I being just naive here? I mean, maybe I am.
No, I think I would maybe interpret it slightly differently. I would suggest that if they were to accept that all they've been working for, is a total fiction, then they would look at the crimes that they've committed against their countries and have no choice but to toss themselves from a very tall building or shoot themselves or something.
Right.
Because if
to,
they looked
reintroduce seppuku into the Western tradition.
seriously, yes.
One of the big problems with Turkey, too, is that Turkey has this ability to use their diaspora within the West as an agent of influence. I mean, they've been funding a lot of the mosque construction on the continent and everything else. If you look at, and Germany, of course, you know, the German government is always crazy paranoid about far-right groups for obvious reasons. But I remember seeing a report from the German government, an internal report a while back, where they said that the biggest far-right group that they're worried about wasn't German at all. Within Germany, it was the Grey Wolves. It was the Turkish, Turkish Grey Wolves. So everybody else is still operating on this idea that your people, if you have people abroad, they're still part of your country. They're still a weapon that they can use. It only seems to be the West that says, like, no. I mean, they simultaneously do and don't, right? Like, because obviously you have people in the government saying these people are a threat, but publicly you can't really admit that, because if you admit that, then you're admitting that multiculturalism doesn't work and you know it to be a lie.
If you admit that, it would be like admitting that a cat born in a barn doesn't become a cow.
Right.
And
that your business trying to say that these cats are going to produce milk for you is not going to work very well.
Yeah, which is, you know, that fiction of cats producing milk is the bedrock foundation of Europe's pension system.
Right. Yeah.
That's where we're at. Cats producing milk. That's where we're at, exactly. Watch your language, sir. It's genuinely absurd because they know, I mean, and you see it in the language, our Muslim community, our this and that community, our Jewish community, our Hindu community, our whatever. You see that they recognize that there's a difference.
Yeah.
But they're just not allowed to turn it into a legal difference.
Right.
For example, by saying, well, going forward, there's going to be 2 tiers of citizenship. those with pre-1945 ancestry and those without. And those who don't have pre-1945 ancestry, yeah, they are at risk of being expelled if they misbehave in certain ways, if they are dependents on the state, if they are criminals, if they are subversive, etc., etc. And so the minute you recognize that, oh, what? You are reintroducing Nuremberg laws, and you are reintroducing this, that, and the other thing. But the objective reality is that Europe, especially, but also even more so the United States, actually, these parts of the world are being overwhelmed by insane numbers of immigrants. And I say that as an immigrant. And the objective is to demographically terraform them and to break them. Because diversity favors authoritarians, it favors autocrats. And you're getting the worst kinds of autocrats. You're getting these cameras installed up and down the United States. What do you call them? The
flock cameras.
The flock cameras. Now legislation is passing in Europe and in the States saying that in your car, you will have a camera watching you. Presumably it's going to be eavesdropping on you. Everybody's encouraged to have, I don't know, Alexa or some Google thing in their homes, which is also listening to you. Your mobile phone is spying on you.
Right.
And you've never been less safe.
Yeah. And you can't go on the subway. You can't go to a park. I mean, this is what it's always sold to us, where people will say, well, I mean, don't you want these kinds of things because we can prevent crime or we can deport illegals and do this kind of thing? And it's like, yeah, but we know what it'll be used for. I mean, and also if they actually wanted to stop crime, if they actually wanted to restore order in these public places, and I'm not just speaking of the United States, but obviously of Europe, it would take 5 minutes. I mean, to me, this has always been the great thing of El Salvador, which is you actually can just solve this problem. It doesn't even take that long. I mean, there actually is a fix everything button. And if you just hit it, you get to live in a good society. The reason they're not pushing it is because they don't want to live in that kind of society.
But then you want to look at the political selection process. Yeah. Which is sort of the same all over the West. Because all over the West, what you have now is career politicians. Because you got rid of the aristocracy, who were the actual career politicians, but who were also deeply tied to a land and to a place and to a people.
And had a stake in its long-term success. I mean, none of these people...
Because they were tied to it in that way, absolutely.
Yeah.
They had real skin in the game.
Right.
Now you have the professional politician, who is just a servant of the oligarch. That's all he is. Because he doesn't know, as a professional politician, how far he will make it. The only way that he will make it is if he gets funded. That automatically makes him a hostage.
Right.
And so the decision makers, as politicians, first, they're not bred for it. And yes, breeding does matter. If you have a family tradition of something, like everybody will go to a pizza place and that says, "Oh, we've been making pizza since 1905."
Right. Yeah.
It's well, that means that you must be really, really good at it.
Right.
Well, we've been leading society for 600 years. No, this is inequality.
Yeah, how dare you think that? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, retards. Thank you. Like, okay. But it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's literally the same thing. So you have this political class that is, by definition, hostage. Because unless they stay on the good side of the donors, their party kicks them out.
Right.
And if they have to stay on the good side of the donors, well, apparently this is what the donor class wants. And again, the donor class is not tied to industry in the West. No. It's not tied to manufacturing. It's not tied to agriculture, because every single policy in the West is aimed at breaking farmers and their connection to the land and their institutional and historic memory.
Well,
it's tied to finance.
Right. Finance fundamentally, but even in the ones
and technology.
Yeah. Yes. And and of course, they have no real stake in the success of the national project. I mean, in many ways, they can always move overseas and whatever else. I mean, you mentioned agriculture just because I talked about it earlier in the show, in the segment before I brought it on. Right now, the Republicans are trying to pass this new amnesty. And of course, the guys who are spearheading are these agricultural companies. And the Republicans are doing this bit where they're like, oh, our farmers are farmers are farmers. It's like, no, it's not Farmer Jones on his 20 acres that have been passed down from generation to generation. These are these giant combines that are bringing in illegals and are getting all sorts of subsidies from the taxpayer and everything else. And a lot of the money that they're bringing in probably isn't even staying in this country. Like it's not farmers tied to the land in the same way that people imagine it is.
It's the hedge fundification of everything.
Right.
Because all of these businesses, to get to that scale, they need mergers and acquisitions.
Right.
When they do these mergers and acquisitions, what do? They borrow an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
And
now you're a prisoner.
that's it. That's it. That's the kill shot. Underneath all of this is the usury-based economy, is the extent to which debt underpins everything. I lived in the States for 2 years. The first thing everybody told me was, have you got a credit card? The first thing you have to do when you get to the States, you have to make sure that you have a credit card. Like, why? I borrowed money once in my life. I hated it. I never want to do it again. Why do I need a credit card? You must have a credit card. You have to get a credit card. And you have to keep on working your way up the credit score. Otherwise, essentially, you're a non-person.
More or less. And that's one of the ways they get, in passing, that's also one of the ways they get political dissidents is they say you're frozen out of certain financial institutions, which if you're trying to have a credit score, if you're trying to show a record so you can do something like buy a house, you're frozen out. You can't do any of those things. And so for all intents and purposes, you might as well not even exist.
Exactly.
Of course, they're doing the same thing in Europe, too. Well, this brings us back to something I wanted to say about this showdown with America and Iran is that on paper, I mean, obviously the Iranian regime is not doing great. I mean, there were these problems before everything else. You had the protests and they had to put it down by force and whatever else. How many people died? I mean, that's up to people out there, depending on who you want to believe. But one thing that I think is unquestionable at this point is the one absolute advantage that Iran has is they can withstand a lot more punishment than America can. And America probably can't. America has suffered barely any casualties with this military campaign so far. And that is already enough that people are getting cold feet. If you tried to take some coastal areas or Kog Island or whatever else and 10 soldiers died doing whatever, it would be the end of the world. Whereas the Iranian government can take these kinds of hits over and over and over again precisely because it's not as dependent on the global economy, because it has a system of government where you don't have to feed this hysteria all the time. And because it's frankly, as you pointed out before, it doesn't have to worry about the international credit market or debt market or anything like that. So how do you even defeat such an enemy? Because, I mean, unless you're willing to occupy them and just devastate them and reconstruct them, which we're obviously not going to do, what else can you do other than just declare victory and leave?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the big dependence that the Iranians have on the world economy is the need to export oil. And if they cannot export oil, that is a real problem for them. But at the same time, they can stop everybody else from exporting oil. So it's not just their problem. It's instantly everybody else's problem. But it should be said that they do face this massive problem and this very serious constraint. Iran is also a food importer. But these are countries, I mean, remember, when Saddam Hussein was under sanctions, everybody likes to point out that Madeleine Albright said that killing 500,000 Iraqi children was worth it just to put sanctions on Saddam Hussein. And it is true. That makes her a monster. She was a monster, absolutely, as did everybody who backed the sanctions regime against Iraq that led to this level of death. But Saddam was also a monster for seeing the first 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 children of his nation getting killed and deciding, screw it, I'm going to stay in power anyway. And that's the exact same mindset that the Iranians have. That's the mindset that Assad had in Syria. That's the mindset of all of these regimes. They will take the punishment and they will let their people take the punishment. And in a way, sanctions make them stronger.
Right.
Because what happens is that you eliminate the ability of dissidents by controlling the ability to punish and reward people based on loyalty.
Right, right.
So the reality is that this isn't going to weaken the regime. This is going to strengthen it.
One of the, I guess the big calculation then becomes, because somewhere in the back of the minds of American policymakers, they clearly thought this at the beginning. I mean, President Trump was basically telling the Iranian people to rise up, and then they just kind of said, forget about it. And every once in a while, they'll say something like, oh, the Kurds are going to go and do whatever. Insofar as an outsider can even know, what is the stability of the Iranian regime at this point? Because there were these widespread protests a while back, but the problem is a government tends to stay in power as long as the ruling class has the moral confidence to do what's necessary to stay in power. And there just haven't been any signs of dissent or division from among the ruling. So, I mean, you can have whatever protests you want. You can have whatever for Western liberals, like, oh, here's a sexy Persian girl smoking a cigarette. It's like the Iranian government doesn't care. They're just going to crush you. And unless you're going to bomb them out of power, they're going to stay in power.
Well, look, it is obviously difficult to see any of this. I mean, let's dispense with the Kurds first. Yeah. There is no chance of the Kurds succeeding. No. None whatsoever. There is nothing that will bring Turkey into the war on the side of Iran other than
right.
a Kurdish insurgency. Like, if you want Turkey to join this war against you, play the Kurdish card. Go on.
Right.
They're isolated. They're deeply penetrated by the Iranians. They're being smashed left and right. A couple of days ago, a large number of their weapons depots got blown up by the Iranians. They know their movements. They know what they're up to. They're deployed against them. This is hopeless. In terms of public support, the regime has been facing waves of unrest for quite some time.
Right.
There was the late 1990s, very small student unrest that was dealt with. There was the unrest against Ahmadinejad when the State Department interfered with Twitter to tell them not to do scheduled maintenance because that might disrupt the protests. They dealt with that. From around 2014, I believe, or 2015, they've had a serious wave of unrest every year or every other year. And so they've been dealing with this problem for some time. Now, you've basically forced the public to focus only on survival, on surviving until the next day and getting enough food for the next day, which actually isn't the atmosphere for them to conduct protests, because most of these protesters are going to be rarely from the poorest classes of society.
Right.
Mostly it is going to be the middle class.
Yeah.
And a foreign war tends to destroy the middle class.
Right.
It tends to absolutely decimate the middle class. So there's no reason to expect more politically potent protests right now. This doesn't make the regime popular. This doesn't mean that they're well liked.
No, not at all.
But it does mean that there are no rival centers of power in Iran right now.
Right. And this guy, the pretender, is not exactly, I mean, I know they chanted his name with protest, but this idea that he has like a mass following, this seems ridiculous. I mean, you've got a diaspora in LA or whatever else that will cheer his name, but that's about it.
Yeah. The whole thing with Pahlavi was never serious. He would survive around 5 minutes in Iran.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. Even Trump, I mean, they asked Trump about that relatively early in the war, and he was like, he just kind of like laughed it off. And it's like, all right, it's a pretty bad sign when even President Trump is like, yeah, this guy doesn't have it.
No, he doesn't. He absolutely doesn't.
Well, what then becomes the long-term consequence of this? Because, well, I mean, first things first, this is just dragging on. Is there even a chance of a negotiated settlement at this point? Because at this point, we've done this so many times. The war has been declared over. We've got a deal. President Trump even signed that memorandum of understanding in Versailles, of all places, and everything else. But here we are again, and now you have more American casualties. Is this just the new normal?
There is a way out. There is a way out, I think. And basically, instead of the Iranians charging the ship owners for passage, they would charge the Gulf states under the table. Everybody would understand what is happening. And that is where they get the $300 billion that they've been promised.
Yeah,
the Gulf states pay them. And every year, the Iranians give them an invoice. If you don't pay, there will be consequences.
Right.
Essentially, that would be one way around it. The Gulf states, would they swallow it? Maybe at some point, if the Americans made them. And in exchange, you go back to a kind of JCPOA format where these new Iranian facilities are placed under surveillance, but it is accepted that Iran is a nuclear threshold state.
Yeah.
So the Americans would lose the Persian Gulf, and the Iranians would have a nuclear option. This would require the Americans to basically slap the Israelis around and tell them to sit down. They've done enough damage. Thank you.
Is such a thing even possible at this point? Because every once in a while,
That's
President
where it
Trump
gets-
shows a certain, because on the one hand, President Trump will occasionally show this kind of defiance of Israel or even hostility toward it. And then on the other hand, he always seems to be coming back to defend them and everything else. Now, Israel and American politics, I mean, I remember when Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, would always say things like, my purpose in politics is to defend Israel. Like that was a statement that he made. Like that's why I'm here, is to keep
My
the
purpose
American
in
left.
politics is to be a traitor.
Yeah, basically. Well, he's not a traitor. Well, being a traitor like presupposes that he ever thought of himself as American.
Good point.
And there's no evidence of that. But they've lost the left at this point. I mean, the American left has decisively turned on Israel. Yes, you can point to this guy or that guy, but I mean, we all see where this is going. On the right, it's clearly a generational thing. I mean, have they lost the American right? No, I don't think you're going to see anybody change their mind about this stuff. But 10 years, I mean, maybe this is where it's going in this direction. But the question for now is, can President Trump, who in a way is like the least independent and the most independent on this issue, can he force the Israelis to swallow it? Because if anybody can, he can. He's probably the only Republican who could do that. But there's been no evidence that when it really comes down to it, he's willing to impose costs on these people.
Does he want to? I mean,
he's a smart enough politician to know that it can't go on like this forever with the midterms, if only because of the cost of gas and the cost of living.
well, look, the midterms, I'm of two minds. Initially, I thought this is a bit hopeless for the midterms. Then I thought, but the Democrats are so rubbish that you could basically run it. I think Axios described it as a campaign of hate.
The campaign of hate, right? Yeah, I was going to talk about that on the show tomorrow. It's just a pure red scare. Look at how crazy these people are, which they are.
Which they are cartoon villains. But, if you're allowing flock cameras to be planted up and down the country, you also are a cartoon villain.
Cartoon villain, yeah.
So there is no real difference.
Gotta love democracy, right? I mean, these wonderful choices that we have. What if you get a bad king? What do we do?
I mean, I'm just tired.
Yeah, man.
I'm tired of pretending. It's just sick, man.
I mean, there does seem to be this. Yeah, it's something inherent in the way that the system plays out, where like no one can actually break away from these disastrous policy choices, because at some level, everybody knows what needs to be done, and yet they can't quite do it. Like we're locked into these things regardless of the long-term consequences.
If you were to take 5 minutes and think, if the West was governed by enemies who wanted to destroy it,
right,
and who want to absolutely erase its heritage, what kind of system would they trap you in? And what would be different about today's world?
Yeah.
I mean, I was speaking to somebody about what would happen if Britain, where I live, were to become a Chinese colony or something, or to fall under Chinese vassalage. And the point was made to me, and I think it's very correct. Basically, the Chinese would treat Britain as a sort of natural reserve.
Yeah.
They'd want to keep it pristine, keep it clean, keep it functional, be able to visit and admire this once great country and just sit around and then leave.
Right.
You'd have to sort of imagine something completely different to take control of Britain and then say, well, actually, the shires aren't diverse enough.
Right.
I tell you what you need right now. You need a Congolese stabber living next to your children's school.
Right. Yeah, I've made that point myself, that the idea, if you had literal foreign military conquest, it would probably be less harmful. And you wouldn't have this kind of insane hostility that you get from our government right now. Like it wouldn't occur to the Chinese. Yeah. You wouldn't have the Chinese like imposing Congolese like rapists and Haitians and everything else and saying you're not allowed to get jobs, because they would feel like they have to keep the white people at least somewhat appeased. Like you got to give them something. You can't just crush them. When it comes to just like utterly crushing the spirit of a people, apparently you can only do that with a liberal democracy.
Is it in any way democratic, and is it in any way liberal?
Well, that too. Yeah. Well, certainly not liberal anymore in terms of the basic freedoms that we are supposed to enjoy in the West and everything else. And certainly in terms of democracy, no matter how many times people scream that they don't want these sorts of things, apparently their votes don't matter. This brings us, of course, to what's going on. There was something I wanted to touch on real quick, just to pivot away from foreign policy for a second, which is this pretty horrific crime that just took place in the United Kingdom, which is something that I think my mostly American audience probably doesn't know anything about, where you had this politician from the Reform Party, Anne Whitcomb, who was basically beaten to death. And the police came out and initially said, well, there's no real political importance to anything else. It's just one of these things. And then they arrested a guy, and it turns out, no, actually, this was a far left guy, and he drove up there and he had all this material and everything else. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he just like beat her to death with a baseball bat or a similar weapon. And this was like, and this was like an old woman. So it's not like she was in any kind of position to defend herself. And people seem to be even celebrating this to some extent. Like there's not like the kind of outrage. And a lot of people are comparing this to what happened to Charlie Kirk here in the States.
I mean, Anne Whitcomb was a very liberal Catholic woman.
Right. She was not far right.
Political sense, liberal in the political sense, not in the social sense. Her politics were very classic liberal politics. And she was a very serious Catholic social conservative. She was supportive of marriage. It's what is actually marriage, not this barbarity, this masquerade that gets passed around as marriage these days. She was supportive of normal sexual relations between married people. She was the only person who voted against the Climate Change Act in 2008 and opposed every single subsequent step towards more climate extremism. She was right about most of the important things in life, generally. And she was both a very strong matriarchal figure, in that if you received the dressing down from her, you were receiving the dressing down of your life. And at the same time, she was a very human person who openly said, yes, of course I have gay friends. I have friends who I don't agree with about abortion, about divorce, about having children out of wedlock, about ever using drugs, about all of these things. But I maintain my friendships even though I have these disagreements. And for that statement was included in a hit piece by Hope Not Hate, who were under Keir Starmer and now under new Prime Minister Andy Burnham. They are an important part of the British government.
Yes.
This organization is an important part of the British government. And as with everything leftist, the actual intent of the group is the literal opposite of the group's name. And so because it says Hope Not Hate, these are genuine hate mongers. Large numbers of my friends have been the targets of hit pieces by them. And it seems that they have some relationship with intelligence, and they have some relationship with Labour Friends of Israel, and they have some relationship with some donors linked to Israel, shall we say. And all these guys do is promote attacks against anybody who advocates sanity on immigration, on social questions, on economics, on energy policy, etc., etc. So this guy, we don't know anything about him right now. And we know that if he was, say, far right, quote unquote, we would know everything about him now. And we would have people saying, well, he was radicalized by Nigel Farage or by Rupert Lowe or by this, that, or the other person. So far, the police are keeping a very tight lid on the information that is being released. But there's a couple of points that are worth making here. The first point is that the police, exactly as you said, initially tried to pretend that this was nothing political,
Right.
that there was no political dimension to it. Really, she lives in the middle of nowhere, and some guy drove 300 miles, 4.5 hours to get to her house,
Right.
bash her over the head and leave, but it's not political. Don't worry about it, guys. And the prime minister at the time, Starmer, apparently told Nigel Farage that it had been a burglary gone wrong.
Oh, my God.
Incredible. The second thing, which is genuinely remarkable, a couple of days after the murder, it had obviously become known to the police that this was politically motivated. The counterterrorism police in Britain, in London, I believe, lead a series of raids and arrest 13 people, including a 60-year-old and an 82-year-old, on charges of terrorism, accusing them of plotting to attack some Muslim gathering by Ahmadiyya Muslims, who are the, I don't know how to say this, but the more tolerable than others, shall we say. That these guys were planning an attack on them. And they raided their houses, and apparently some of them were arrested quite aggressively, doors broken down and things like that. And then it became a main topic of conversation and a main news item discussing how there was this far-right plot to attack Muslims at a peaceful assembly, possibly with drones, and inflict mass casualties. And the Home Secretary, who is a Pakistani Muslim, came out and said that lives were undoubtedly saved by police action. And the Prime Minister came out and said that this was a very serious and credible plot. And it turns out that there was absolutely nothing of the sort.
Of course.
After the news of Anne Widdecombe's murder had begun to die down a little bit, and while everybody was distracted with the shenanigans at the World Cup, the police released a statement saying, actually, we're not bringing charges against anybody, except for this one guy whose house we searched, and we found an extendable baton there and a taser, and we're charging him. So the level of cynicism there, like, they did this whole circus and arrested these 13 people only to distract from the fact that a far-left lunatic had been radicalized, possibly by organs linked to the British state, and murdered a 78-year-old woman by beating her head with a hammer 21 times as she was having lunch. That's how far they're willing to go.
Yep. And this is the liberal democracy that we must be willing to fight and defend against all comers.
Don't forget the international rules-based order, brother.
Yeah. God save the king.
Yeah.
Well, on that black-pilled note, I really want to thank you for coming on because I thought this was a great conversation. But where can people find you and how can they support you?
Sure. I'm on X at Firas Modad. I have a website where I talk geopolitics called modadgeopolitics.com. And I'm a presenter at the Lotus Eaters. But obviously, I speak at a personal capacity. These are just my own insane far-right opinions, nothing to do with anybody else.
Well, the insane far-right opinions are always welcome here at Identity Politics. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Shiloh Hendricks trial began yesterday. You may remember this. This is the young woman who was accosted by nuns at a park in Rochester, Minnesota. She uttered the forbidden word of power. She is now facing multiple counts of disorderly conduct, which in theory carry the potential for jail time. She raised over $800,000 in response to the incident. It was something we talked about on here in the past. This is what we mean when we talk about anarcho-tyranny. You can't go to a park without nuns accosting you, stealing your stuff, attacking you if you're especially unlucky. They destroy everything they touch. That's why they were brought here. And as every non knows, whatever they say, whatever they claim, they know how power works. They know power is on their side, which is why they are so quick to shove a camera in your face and sick the journalists on you. This is what they are. This is what they do. There's no mystery about any of this. And if you even say a word, this is enough to get you put on trial. This is where we're at in this country. This is your First Amendment. Let's not make fun of the Brits and the Euros here. We aren't much better off. Now, jury selection is underway. It hasn't been totally done yet. I'd like to give a shout out to the National Organization for Vital Action, NOVA. They just did a demonstration outside the trial, and I'll read their statement. NOVA did a demonstration today on behalf of Shiloh Hendricks, a white mother who's being unjustly prosecuted in Minnesota. She's being charged by the state of Minnesota with disorderly conduct and a brazen display of racial double standards and two-tier justice. This is part of a broader pattern in this area of an influx of hostile, anti-white foreigners who make once safe white communities a living nightmare. The state of Minnesota was not concerned about the native white mother or the child's safety, but instead is attempting to scapegoat and punish the white mother who protected her child no more. Appreciate you doing that, guys. We can't let it go on like this. They've taken too many of us. Solidarity matters, and whatever our ideological differences or religion or whatever else, power treats us as whites, therefore we must respond as whites. Full solidarity with Shiloh Hendricks. We will be following this trial closely, and as it heats up, I will bring you more. We get out of this together or not at all. I'm Kevin DeAnna. We'll talk again real soon. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.